this evening. We just thank you for each one of the speakers that you provided. We thank you for the leadership that they provide. We just pray that you would strengthen and undergird them in the work that they do. We're all here, dear Lord, because we're concerned for the direction of our country, and we just thank you for those that are in these leadership positions and these things so important to us. We see problems in our country and spending and fiscal issues in our state. We see life issues. We see education issues. We see foreign the foreign situation and the war clouds that seem to be gathering. Here we just pray for your blessings on our country, for those in leadership. We just ask your blessing on our meeting, that everything that we do would be pleasing to you. We ask your blessing on each one that's here. We thank you for those that are here. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen.
And I want to get our youngest Tea Party member up here to lead us in the pledges. Caleb? Uh-oh, we missing Caleb?
He's coming.
There he is.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I honor
The Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
I'm going to make a few quick announcements here for Tea Party business. I'm sorry, Kat, here. She always says I'm a moving target. We're going to have a table out at the San Angelo Coliseum at the gun show this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And I think Deborah's going to pass around a volunteer sign-up sheet. Bring some guns if you got to sell them. That always helps interesting. We're going to have all our literature and things out, but we need people to help us man the table. Roy and I are going to be there and get it set up. I think Deborah. And we'll be there at 11 or 12, but we're going to need some relief to go eat and everything. That's about the only announcements I think we have. Be sure to check the website. It's interesting that Michael's here tonight and some of the transparency things that came up, because National Journal did a real interesting article on our congressman, who is chairman of the ethics committee, on how they were trying to not have to disclose their lobbyist traveling trips on their annual disclosure. And he was really upset, said that the ruckus was caused by a reporter doing their job. I said, well, that's something to be mad over. But anyway, that's all we have with that. This is going to be an easy meeting for me. I want to welcome the Life, Liberty, and Property Tour here to the San Angelo Tea Party. And with that, I'm going to go sit in the audience and turn it over to Michael Quinson.
Well, thank you all so much for letting us be here with you. It's a real pleasure for each of us to kind of get together. We all go scattering around the state doing our own thing, so it's always like a little family reunion when we're able to get together to do these things. Tell you a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it. But before I do so, I would be remiss personally not to introduce one of the finest members of the Texas House of Representatives, who hopefully in about 6 or 7 months is going to be one of the finest members of the Texas Senate, Mr. Charles Perry, sitting back there. We have not yet issued our official endorsement in the Senate district race, but we're going to be fairly soon. I bet you can guess who we're going to be endorsing. I don't know what all these yahoos are doing, but Charles Perry's a great man. If you don't know Mr. Perry from Lubbock, I hope you'll grab him this evening and spend a few minutes to visit with him. Obviously, you have an empty Senate seat now with Mr. Duncan moving on to Texas Tech University as their chancellor, and so it's a great opportunity to bring a really fresh set of eyes into the Texas Senate. I'll tell you about the Life and Property Tour, what we're doing. We're trying to go around the state and give folks an idea not only of what has and hasn't happened in the Texas legislature, but perhaps more importantly, give you some ideas of what each one of us as citizens should be working for. What are the things that we should be communicating with, how we should be communicating with our elected officials, particularly the members of the Texas legislature, in the kind of things that we as conservatives want to see achieved to ensure a better, stronger Texas. Now, a couple, make sure, it's always good to make sure everyone's operating with the same language. We all start talking and we all know the words we use. So I'll give you just a couple quick definitions. When you hear us say these things, you're going to hear us talk occasionally about rules. Now, we're not talking about monopoly, although a lot of times the legislature feels like they're playing with pretend money. When we talk about the rules, we're talking about the rules of the Texas House, the rules of the Texas. You don't find those things. You can't go find the rules of the House, rules of the Senate in the state constitution. You can't find them in the government code. They're passed by each body, and they're this little booklet that they sometimes carry around and sometimes they just ignore. But they're the rules for the operations of the legislature, of the House and of the Senate. And it can sometimes be pretty dry, boring stuff. But at the end of the day, the rules govern the debate. And the debate determines the outcome. And so you and I need to make sure we understand the rules too. You can't play the game effectively if you don't know the rules. Lord help the kid who shows up at his first football game and doesn't know which way to take the ball. Want to have some troubles there. So understanding the rules is important. You're also going to hear us talking a little bit about something called the two-thirds rule. It's going to come up a couple of different times, and we chat about the problems, particularly in the state Senate. The two-thirds rule. The two-thirds rule is a rule that's been in place now for a while that has been that sits there to ensure that conservative legislation doesn't move forward. The two-thirds rule is kind of a gentleman's agreement in the Texas Senate that no legislation will be debated unless two-thirds of the Senate agrees to it being debated. Now, you and I can't go anywhere to find out who was the 1/3 plus 1 who stopped the debate. You and I can't find that anywhere. That's part of their little agreement. And I think you're going to hear a number of us suggest that maybe that should change. You and I should have more eyes on what our state senators are and aren't doing. You're going to hear us talk about the office of Speaker of the House, the speakership. Now, this is a little scandalous, what we're doing here. We're kind of doing something we're not really supposed to do, because under current state law, actually, all of us talking about the speakership is illegal. Now, it's illegal, but it was vacated by a federal court about 5 years ago because of the action of our friend Kelly Shackelford from Liberty Institute out in Plano, Texas. But under Texas law, for more than 40 years, the citizens of the state of Texas could not engage on the question of who is the third-ranking constitutional officer in the state of Texas. How is that for locking citizens out of their government? Now, fortunately, we can talk about it. So we're going to talk about this. So why is the Speaker such an important thing to talk about? Well, it's kind of like the rules. The Speaker of the House controls the flow of legislation through the appointment of committee chairs, and indeed, the appointment of the committees overall. So who the Speaker is controls the legislation that goes to the floor. Who the Speaker is determines who's the chairman of the Calendars Committee. That's a committee of the Texas House that decides what does and doesn't go to the floor for a vote. It decides who's the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and the Ways and Means Committee, and all those sorts of things that impact our lives. With that little bit of ground setting, let me quickly introduce the men and women standing here today. Each of us have about an hour and a half long presentation. No, we'll go on about 7 or 8 minutes each, and we're going to give you our, we all have kind of our little thing we'll talk a little bit about. But probably the most important part of the evening, though, is going to come when we start kind of doing interaction, questions, answers, things that you see with us. I'm trying to give you an idea of why those items are and aren't moving through the legislative process, and maybe get your input on the kind of legislation you want to see, the priorities that you have for the Texas legislature. Appropriately, to my right are all these nice folks. But at the end of the line down there is Joanne Clement. She will be batting cleanup because Joanne always manages to make sure that she fills in the gaps when all of us forget things. Joanne Clement heads up Grassroots America, We the People. She is one of the great coordinators of the statewide Tea Party movement. For the past several years, she has been the chairman of the advisory committee to the Tea Party caucus of the Texas legislature. Lord, you tried to put that on a business card. You're going to put a printer out of business. Joanne Fleming is going to be talking to us in a few minutes. Next, Joanne Fleming is John Seago. He is the legislative director for Texas Right to Life, the oldest, the largest premier pro-life organization in the state, protecting life from conception to natural death. One of the great warriors in the conservative movement, John Seago. Next to John is Marilyn Gerstenschlager. She is a great volunteer activist with Eagle Forum. She and Kathy Adams are, of course, to be reckoned with. Both of them, stand about 5'2". But it's amazing to watch legislators quiver when the two of them walk through the halls of the Texas legislature. You would think they're carrying bazookas and baseball bats. Instead, they just come to armed with truth, which is far more scary to most elected officials. Ann Hettinger with Concerned Women for America. Again, one of the great stalwarts of the conservative movement. In fact, John and I have talked on a number of occasions that what he and I do, the conservative movement, in a lot of ways is built on what Ann and what Kathy Adams have done over the years. It's really exciting for us to be working with them. And last but not least, easily the best looking person on the panel is Tim Lambert, who heads up the Texas Homeschool Coalition. They are the largest defender of parental rights in the great state of Texas. And so with that, I want to start with Tim Lambert and ask Mr. Lambert to kick us off. Please have a seat.
Well, it's great to be with you guys tonight. How many of y'all have heard of homeschooling? Wow, that is great. Well, my wife and I decided to homeschool back in the 1980s. And I tell people I have a BA in political science from Texas Tech. My good friend Charles Perry, by the way, our organization has endorsed in that race, just so you know, and we're supporting Charles Perry for that seat. But several years ago, in fact about 25 years ago, my wife and I were very concerned about the education of our children. We heard some guys speak, had this crazy idea that parents could actually teach their own kids at home. And my mother-in-law always thought we were about a half a bubble off the plum, so it didn't surprise her when we decided to do that. And I tell people I had a BA in political science from Texas Tech, but I always said I was not going to be involved in politics. I wanted to focus on the important things in life. Raising my children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, building my business, and providing for my family. But I tell people it was Democrat Attorney General Jim Maddox who got me involved in politics, because Jim Maddox heard about all these people that were homeschooling, and he said that he did not believe, he said this publicly, he did not believe parents were qualified to raise their kids, much less teach them at home. And he actually sued the State Board of Education, tried to prohibit that. And I went to this hearing, and I came away from that realizing that if people like you and I didn't get involved in this process, people like him were going to be making decisions telling me what I could and could not do for my children. And so we sued the state of Texas, and almost 10 years in court. It was really an incredible thing that parents really should have the right to make decisions for their own children. What an amazing concept. We won that lawsuit, and in the last few years, we have actually expanded our rights. We basically say that parents have the right to make decisions for their children because parents have a fundamental constitutional right to direct the care, control, and upbringing of their children. Anybody disagree with that? Of course not. And yet, there are people in Washington, D.C. and people in Austin who believe they are better qualified than parents to make those decisions. And so what we've seen in the last few years is the battle for the right of parents to make these decisions for their children has actually moved into the family courts. And we've been involved in a number of lawsuits over the years in which a vindictive grandparent has sued a single parent under what's called the Grandparent Access Statute. Now these are not grandparents like you and I. Okay? These are grandparents who decide they're going to decide what that grandchild can and cannot do. And the state Grandparent Access Statute allows, in the cases where there is a death, a divorce, or incarceration, for the parents of that dead, deceased, or dead, divorced, or incarcerated parent to sue the single parent, which is most of the time a woman, for access, that is possession, or access, which is visitation, or possession, which is having that child. Now bear in mind, we are not talking about a parent here who is abusive or neglectful. We're talking about parents who are doing what is right for their children, and someone disagrees with that legitimate decision. And the state of Texas allows grandparents in those situations to sue that parent. And so what we wind up having in several of these cases we've been involved in is, in fact, I'll tell you the first case we ever was involved in was in Ector County, when a couple decided they were going to homeschool their kids because they were really concerned about the negative influence they were being exposed to in the local public school. The grandparents were very upset with that decision, and in fact, the grandfather was so upset he assaulted the father in front of the family. And those parents did what you and I would probably do. They went and got a restraining order on their family. And that grandfather then filed a grandparent access case. And over a period of several years, the parents spent thousands of dollars defending themselves. And ultimately, they went to the grandfather, and they said, you know, we can't continue to do this. How can we settle this? Let's sit down and reason together. And the grandparents said, we'll drop our case if you give us custody of the daughter, and we will let you keep your two sons. Now, my friends, that should not happen in America.
No.
That should not happen in Texas. Your right as a parent should not be dependent on how much money you have. And so, you know, one of the things that you're going to find tonight as each of us speak is we have our own issues. Some are physical issues, some are parental rights issues, some are life issues, but the reason that we're all doing this is because we all find that we have the same friends and the same opponents when it comes to the legislature. So we have been working on our issue to try to amend, to try to close the loopholes of the Grandparent Access Statute that really allows a grandparent to file a lawsuit and basically say, because I have more money than you do, I'm going to keep you in court until you run out of money until I get your child. Now the amazing thing is you would think that we're trying to change that law, you might think that it was grandparents that opposed the changes that we're trying to make. You would be wrong. The people who are opposing this are called the Family Law Foundation, the attorneys, because these lawsuits mean money to them. The interesting thing is the last three sessions, our opponent, the head of that Family Law Foundation, the lobbyist for the Family Law Foundation, is also the lobbyist for the Texas Trial Lawyers Association. Happens to be the same guy that's going after Michael Quinn Sullivan at the Texas Ethics Commission. And so we have been unsuccessful in the last session. I went to my friend Dan Patrick, who is the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor, and I have every confidence is going to be the next Lieutenant Governor. And I said to him, Dan, I got to tell you, I got a problem. Our legislation, this is not controversial legislation, but it was killed in the Senate Jurisprudence Committee because we had a Democrat who chaired that committee who was more interested in what the lawyers thought than what parents thought. And Dan, you got to tell me that is not going to happen under your tenure. I can't tell you what he said, but I'm fairly confident that it's not going to happen under his tenure. So one of the things that we homeschoolers learned years ago was that there is, sometimes my friends say, Tim, I don't understand when we look at polls and the vast majority of the public agrees with something and the legislature does exactly the opposite. Why is that? And I said, it's because they don't care what the polls say. They just care who votes. And my friends, that's the reason that we're involved in this process, and I hope that's the reason you're involved in this process, is because we have to change the players in this situation, not just for the right of parents, but for the right of the taxpayers, the right of the unborn, and all those others. So I thank you very much. Michael's walking up here very slowly because he knows that I'm supposed to be finished and I'm not yet, so I appreciate that. I look forward to answering your questions. Right now, we're going to start passing around the room here some electronic clipboards where if you'd like to sign up to get on our email list for notifications about things on the legislature, issues that we don't cover, you can sign up here on these electronic notepads there. Next up, I'm real excited to introduce to you Ann Pettinger with Concerned Women for America.
Nobody here is more excited to be here than me. Because when I look out here and see all of these wonderful faces, especially those people with red shirts, I'm more encouraged than I've ever been. Because for about the last 17 years, every session, I've been walking the halls in Austin and batting my head against the powers that be down there. Well, this time, because of this wonderful tour, and Joanne and all of them working so hard, we have a brand new senator in Senate District 2. That's my senator. Now, I'm just telling you, he was 60% Republican. Now I've got one that's 100%. In Senate District 16 in Dallas, we had a man who was a little bit less than 60% Republican. And now we have one that's 100% Republican. Again. In Senate District 10 in Arlington, that was Wendy Davis's seat. Now we are going to have Connie Burton there. And she's 100% Republican. All of them. And I'm so excited about this young man sitting back here at this table because he's going to bring that same 100% Republican to the Senate. And I'm so excited about it. In one of the districts in the Dallas area, we had 100% Democrat sitting there as a Republican in the Texas House. He's out, and 100% Republican is there. And all over Texas, we see that happening. I am excited more than ever before about it. I'm way too old to be doing this, but I can't give it up because it's so exciting for me to finally see an opening at the end of this, right at the end of this time. Concerned for America began about 35 years ago. A little preacher's wife in San Diego, California was sitting there listening to Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan said, "I speak for American women." And this little preacher's wife stood up from that couch, she's tiny, and she said, "She doesn't speak for me." And the end result of that was Concerned Women for America. We have over 500,000 women across the United States that are members of that organization. I've been the state director for the last few years. I just want to tell you a few things. Here's some things that were proposed in the last session that we walked on, we talked on, we tried to get authors for, we worked so hard on, and they didn't go anywhere. A bill increasing the penalty for coercion of abortion. A bill increasing the time allowed pending transfer for our terminally ill patients from hospitals. A bill to amend the judicial bypass, which is being very fraudulently used. A bill initiating religious liberty, a constitutional amendment that says that what it does is it just takes the Supreme Court ruling and codifies them and puts them into our Texas Constitution. So judges and the school districts and everybody else cannot say, well, you know, there's a contract. No. It'll be in our Texas Constitution. And we tried and tried and tried. And the senator from Lubbock held it in his committee and would not allow it to be voted on. The representative from Corsicana, who, by the way, will still be back, as the State Affairs Committee, he would not let it out of his committee. It's a crime that these things are happening. Another is a bill limiting foreign law in Texas courts. And another one is the one that Tim talked about, that Concerned Women for America has worked on with him and walked on. Another bill is to penalize the independent school districts who attempt to use school funds to cover insurance for same-sex partners in opposition to our state constitution. Let me just tell you that last session, in fact, 1 year ago tonight, I was standing on the Capitol steps in Austin, and we had a whole bevy of our state leaders and our representatives, and Representative Perry was there. We were advocating for HB2, and HB2 had 4 tremendous bills. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about that. You see, what happened is the leader of the House said to his person over the calendars committee, don't let any of that stuff get to the floor of the House. And it did. We had a wonderfully brave governor, and he said, it's coming. And so he called session number 1. That's when Wendy Davis did her little thing. And it didn't get passed. You know that. There were, the rule of the bullies took over there. The second session was called. And there are a lot, because Governor Perry said in a private meeting, he said, I told all the legislators, it's really hot in Austin in August. So, guess what? It got passed. And we had a wonderful session with that. Now let me just tell you that you have the opportunity, all of those things we worked on, this coming session, what we're going to be seeing is what happened in San Antonio and what happened in Houston in regards to the LGBT agenda. And that agenda will, in Houston they said that all the bathrooms must be transgender. In San Antonio, they said that if you were a Christian and spoken out against homosexuality, you couldn't have a city contract and you couldn't serve on the city council. So those kinds of things are going on, and that's what's going to happen in this coming session. All of those orange shirts are going to be back, and they're going to be not only pro-choice, but they're going to be pro-LGBT. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. You don't know what that is. That's the word they're using now. So they will be back and we'll be fighting whatever it is that they have. If we will probably have Governor Abbott, and I'm really believing we're going to have Lieutenant Governor Patrick. You got to go vote. You have to go get your people to do it too. Really thinking that, but you know what? We still have Joe Strauss that we have to deal with. And he's the one who's appointing these committees. Now, there's something you can do about that. I'm going to be standing at the door. Here's a little card, and I'm going to give it to you as you go out. What you can do is you can fill it out, give your name and address and all of the information on that, give it back to me, and I'm taking on. You see, my rep is Representative Scott Turner, and I'm going to work with him. And he's given me this great big stack of cards, and if you'll fill them out and give them back to me, I will take them home to Scott. I work in his office, so I will take them back to him, and then what he's going to do is he's going to take these to your rep. And what it will say to your rep is that the constituents here want Scott Turner to be the Speaker of the House. And that's what you can do, and I'll be here to help you. Thank you so much.
Marilyn Gerstenslager from Eagle Ford. Thanks so much.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's been just about a year since I was here and received your warm welcome. And for those of you who were here, you'll remember I talked about the 24,000 students in Texas who are enrolled in our charter schools that are operated primarily by Turkish men who are here on H-1B visas. What I wanted to do tonight is give you a little update on what progress we had at the Capitol. As I told you last summer, we lobbied and asked that charter operators in Texas would be required to be American citizens, just like their counterparts are local school board trustees. Let me put that in other words. Your local school board trustee is an elected official. They take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. You don't have to be an American citizen to apply to operate a charter school in Texas. So we tried to change the law and make it a requirement. Representative Bill Zettler from Arlington was our hero. He took on that bill for us, and the bill never got a hearing in the House Education Committee. I've had a lot of experience as a volunteer lobbyist for Texas Eagle Forum. I lived in Austin for 9 sessions so that I could volunteer daily as a citizen lobbyist on behalf of Texas Eagle Forum. I live 200 miles north of the capital, so it's a big commitment for me to do that. It's much more fun than bridge and golf, and I'm much better at it than games. Well, we were unsuccessful in passing that bill, and we also asked Mr. Zettler to carry another bill for us. For accountability and transparency, we asked him to carry a bill that would require schools to put their check registers online. Now, over half of school tax dollars in Texas are already online. School districts have put them up there voluntarily. And, but we wanted everyone to have to do this, and we got nowhere with that bill also. Someone talked about the calendars committee earlier. Years ago, a state representative told me that the calendars committee is where bills come to die, and many of them do die right there. Well, anyhow, our 2 bills didn't get anywhere, and at the very end of session, Representative Zettler was on the House floor, and he proposed 2 amendments to a big charter school bill. And those amendments both passed. One was to require check registers to be posted online by a charter school, and the other one was that charter operators would have to be qualified voters, which would be an American citizen. Well, both of those amendments passed. However, the bill went on to the conference committee, and unfortunately, the check register requirement was pulled off in conference committee, and the citizenship requirement was almost what we wanted. It was the majority of the board members of a charter operator must be American citizens. You see, we have these 24,000 students in our Turkish-run charter schools in Texas. They're called the Harmony Charter Schools. So next session, what we would like to happen is that all charter operators be required to be American citizens, and that check registers be required to be posted online. One of our main concerns is that you've heard of Race to the Top, or which are federal funds that states could apply for and be granted, and if they got these federal dollars, they would have to implement the Common Core standards in their state. Well, Texas rejected those Common Core standards. Well, President Obama wasn't quite happy with that, so he designed a plan so that individual school districts could apply for Race to the Top funds. Well, the Harmony Charter Schools were among those who applied for Race to the Top funds, and they were awarded almost $30 million in federal funds. I wrote an article about this, about Common Core, and one of the things I said was that Harmony Charter Schools in Texas now have Common Core, and the superintendent of the Harmony Charter Schools, which are the Turkish charter schools, wrote a letter to Texas Eagle Forum denying that they are implementing Common Core in their schools. There is no way they could get around not implementing the Common Core standards in their schools and still get those federal dollars. So we are very concerned about that. Houston ISD and Dallas ISD also have Race to the Top funds. So Common Core is already in some parts of Texas. These are dumbed down, politically correct standards for our students. Our biggest concern with Common Core is that they collect data and they share data on students, very personal, specific data, and they share this data with who knows, whoever is out in cyberspace can have access to this data if the state wants to share it with them. Common Core is also about training little worker bees to serve the global economy. It's not about educating your child. Another concern we have is about the charter schools is that The Harmony Charter Schools in Texas are operated by the Cosmos Foundation. The Cosmos Foundation also operates charter schools in some other states. They operate a charter school in Louisiana, and that charter school was raided by the FBI last December. And then just a few weeks ago, the FBI raided more charter schools that are run by the Turkish people in the states of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And these were crimes called possibly white-collar crimes. So we don't know why the FBI is raiding almost 20 charter schools in America, but to put their check registers online might give some more transparency and accountability, and also to require our charter operators to be American citizens would help with more accountability. One more thing about charter schools. The Chinese have opened charter schools in Florida. If an entity from outside the country invests $1 million in a business in America, they can get permanent visas for this, and I believe they can get something under 10 visas if they invest $1 million in an entity. So the Chinese have opened charter schools not only in Florida, but in some other states. And that's all I have. I hope that after the next session, I'll have a more positive update. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. John Tito from Texas Right to Life.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be able to speak with you and to work with all of these patriots who are very passionate about their causes. So, Texas Right to Life, my name is John Seago. I serve as the Legislative Director for Texas Right to Life. We're the largest and oldest pro-life organization in Texas, and our mission is to protect and to promote the sanctity of innocent human life from fertilization until natural death. And so that is our whole purpose. So specifically, we have a unique role of spearheading the legislative agenda for the pro-life movement in Texas. So when we're in the Capitol, during the session, we're in the Capitol every day working with legislators. We do the research, we help craft the bills, and then in the session, we're there every day promoting the bills, educating on the bills, and making sure that pro-life representatives have what they need to defend and to ultimately pass strong legislation that protects pregnant women, preborn children, and other attacks in favor of individuals who are being attacked in other ways. Now, you might think out of all of these groups, the pro-life group would be the happiest one here. We've had the big headlining victories last year, last summer. We've been winning in the courts. Our bills have been upheld by court after court. Even though Planned Parenthood keeps taking us back to court, we keep winning. Clinics are shutting down. Abortion clinics across the state are closing down because they don't want to follow the rules and the laws that we passed. Pregnant women are hearing positive alternatives to elective abortions, and that means many preborn children of your preborn neighbors are being saved. That is excellent news, and it's something to celebrate, and we definitely are happy about that. However, the victories that we had, and it was mentioned earlier, the pro-life bill that we passed was passed not in the regular session when representatives were supposed to be there in Austin. They were willing to leave Austin without passing a pro-life bill until our Governor Perry, told them, no, get back to Austin and do your job to protect pregnant women and preborn children. And then they still didn't do it. They messed around for a few weeks and didn't get the bill passed in time. So you might have heard of someone named Wendy Davis. She had an opportunity to try to slow our bill down. And so then the governor had to tell them, no, I was serious. Go back into Austin again and pass this pro-life legislation. And eventually our legislators did. So what was the problem? There are two specific issues two themes I want you to think about as we enter into this next session. What we saw on the front lines of the pro-life movement was we saw apathy and we saw cowardice. In your elected officials, we saw these two vices that ended up killing these good pieces of legislation. We saw apathy because we saw elected officials, high-ranking leaders in the Capitol were willing to go another 2 years without passing a single piece of legislation, a single policy that would have protected pregnant women from the predatory abortion industry, that would have saved preborn lives, or would have helped those who were being assaulted in the healthcare system. These elected officials were apathetic to our calls. We had the bills filed, we had the hearings, we even got some to the calendars committee, but they didn't get to the floor because it wasn't a priority. Our Speaker of the House even said that when asked about, are you going to let this pro-life legislation that Governor Perry's been talking about before the session, are you going to let it get to the floor? And he said, I'm going to focus on the important issues. And then he listed water, which he didn't wait. He waited all the way until the end of the session to deal with. Transportation, again, waited until the end of the regular session to talk about. So he thought those were more important than protecting pregnant women, preborn children, and other assaults, stopping other assaults upon the sanctity of human life. So we saw apathy. We also saw cowardice. Specifically in your state senate, we saw elected officials were caving to the medical lobby. They were caving to the self-appointed experts as to how we should deal with the sick, with the disabled, and with the elderly. In Texas, we have it, and usually whenever we talk about pro-life things, we talk about pregnant women. We talk about protecting them. We talk about the preborn. And those things are definitely important. Those are central to our mission in Texas Right to Life. However, what we've seen is a huge gap in protecting the sanctity of human life in the healthcare system and in hospital settings. And so what we have in Texas is an extremely anti-life law that attacks the sanctity of human life for someone who's disabled, for someone who's sick, or for someone who's elderly and needing medical attention. So we've been trying to establish justice for those individuals. And I'll just give you one example. We have a terrible law in the books that is silent about do not resuscitate orders. A do not resuscitate order, or a DNR, is a piece of paper that a patient can sign to say, if I have a cardiac arrest, or if I need paddles, or if I need emergency invasive maneuvers on me, don't do it. I don't want that procedure. The DNR, it's a file, it's something you can fill out if you decide that you don't want medical intervention in those type of situations. Right now, our current law is silent on who can write that for you. So what Texas Right to Life found is that doctors were looking at an individual who's disabled or elderly and making that decision for them, saying, if they go into a cardiac arrest, we don't want to bring them back. If they need paddles or emergency care, we think they're better off dead. So we started finding these DNRs in patient files. And we would have reports around these from the states. So we filed a piece of legislation that says, no, only a patient can write this kind of order. Seems pretty commonsensical, right? It's kind of one of those things that's like, wait a second, we need a law for that? We need a bill for that? Yes, we need a bill. Well, the medical lobby was pushing a bill that was going in the other direction, that was explicitly giving doctors the authority to write this for you. So if you're in the hospital, they could write a DNR order for you that would end your life if you needed the paddles or CPR or something like that. This is just a huge assault on the sanctity of human life of that patient. So what we saw is this bill actually passed the Texas Senate. We led the way against this bill. We had a lot of support from a lot of the groups up here, helped out, and they saw that this was a huge, the Texas homeschoolers, they saw that this was a huge assault on parental rights, is that doctors were making these life and death decisions for their children without even consulting the parents. So it was just kind of a huge, terrible piece of legislation from several different angles. Well, Texas Right to Life, we ended up stopping that bill after it passed the Senate. So we had enough senators that thought doctors should decide whether your life is worth living. And so Texas Right to Life, we've got into this fight, but we were fighting against this medical lobby. We're a pro-life group, and we're fighting this medical lobby and the hospital lobby and all of these experts. And so we ended up stopping that legislation, but that's something we're very concerned about. Our senators were cowardice in the face of that medical lobby. And so I will say that the senator who represents this area, he voted for that piece of legislation. And that's why on our scorecard, he got a 63% pro-life pro-life score because he was not willing to protect your life once you get into a hospital. However, we've endorsed a candidate who has a 122% pro-life score. We found a representative who not only would stop a bad bill, he actually helped us file a good bill that would have put more protections on the patient, not just stopping the medical lobby from getting whatever they want, but making progress in protecting patients and stopping the discrimination against an individual just because they have a disability, an illness, or because they're elderly. So that person obviously is Representative Charles Perry. He got 122% record, and he is definitely acute to and ready to fight for protecting all individuals, whether it's from fertilization or to natural death. So Texas Red's Life, we've already announced our endorsement of him for the Senate race, and definitely think that if you don't know Representative Perry yet, definitely need to get to know him and hear how he has a holistic pro-life view and is ready to get it back for all.
Honorable Joanne Fleming, former County Commissioner of Smith County, Texas, and most feared woman in the great state of Texas.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm working on it. Yes, I am a recovering elected official. I am myself retired from the Commissioner's Court. Well, tonight, I want to thank you so much for coming out. Where is Nathan? Where is Nathan? Hi, Nathan. Nathan and I have been email friends for quite some time. Nathan's been asking me to come out and speak to you all, and since it's close to a 6-hour trip for me, I've been sort of dawdling with other projects, but I said, hey, Nathan, I could bring some of my rowdy friends with me until I can come out. So I am so glad to be here tonight. Before I go into my little Cliff Notes version of everything you need to know and be afraid of with your Texas legislature, I want to ask you, how many here are veterans or spouses of veterans? Thank you so much for serving our country. Thank you. You know, this tour is called the Life, Liberty, and Property Tour. And I'm going to tell you, I think probably since 1776, we've never lived in a time where our life, liberty, and property has been under such assault from the federal government. But I will tell you that your state legislature, the things that go on in Austin, Texas, are also a threat to your life, your liberty, and your property. And what used to happen in Austin, it stayed in Austin. But because of what we're doing, going around the state, telling you what your elected officials are actually doing, what used to stay there doesn't stay there anymore, and consequently, during the primary, some people were fired and sent packing. And we intend to keep it up. There's nothing worse than to be a volunteer activist for 22 years. You know, after you've been doing something like this for 22 years, you get a little bit snarky. When you have every Republican in the state of Texas runs as a conservative, and then when they get in office, they sort of morph into Democrat light. I can tell you that you won't get on the bad side of me any faster than all of a sudden forgetting what a conservative really is. And so tonight I'm going to tell you a couple of things. One is that during the 2011 session, which was the 82nd session of the legislature, and then in the 2013 session, which was your 83rd, we had a majority, a near super majority, both sessions, of Republicans in the House. And we had a majority of Republicans in the Senate. And every statewide office is held by a Republican. But guess what? 51% of the legislation that was passed last session was either authored or sponsored by a Democrat. How did we get here? How did we get here? See, we have to look at the voting records. of the people so that we can determine, is there a distance between what they say they are and what they actually perform at?
Right. Yeah. We got one here? Yep.
Yes, sir, I'm painfully aware of that. I think y'all can do something about that.
Amen.
But let me tell you what happens in Austin. Same thing that happens in Washington, D.C. Big business, big special interest business is in bed with big government. And whether that is at the federal level or at the state level or if it's at your local level, you can be assured that your life, liberty, and property is at stake. There's a big difference between free market principles and big crony capitalism. And what we need to do is to take the for sale sign off of the door of your state capitol. And very quickly, when I come back again, somebody said they thought I had said I'd be back in September. If I said it, I'll be here. I'll have to look at my calendar and we'll coordinate that. But I want to tell you very quickly, your state government spends too much, it borrows too much, and it depends way too much on the federal government. And we'll get in deep into the weeds of that whenever I come back to speak. But I will tell you that the people of Texas have voted over and over when they have a chance in those non-binding resolutions that you vote on when you vote in a Republican primary. People of Texas overwhelmingly say, I think 94%, have said they want spending limited. They want limited government. Well, what happened last session? If you compare the session-to-session spending between the 82nd and the 83rd session, your state legislature spent 26% more. Anybody here believe that's a definition of conservative limited spending? No takers here. I'm in the right room. Is that an aberration? Is that something that just happened? They just sort of swerved into it? They just sort of had an accident and spent that much? No. Because if you look at spending, the spending patterns over the last 20 years in the state of Texas, you will see that all fund spending have grown about 310% over the last 20 years. Well, you say, but Joanne, you know, we have a big old state, we got people moving here, growth in population, we had a little inflation during the last 20 years. So what about that? Well, if you take the combined rates of inflation and population growth, you get about 139% over that same 20-year period. Okay, the math is simple. 310% increase in spending is a whole lot more than 139%. You know, Tea Party people can do math. That's what they're afraid of. So it was no accident. It is a very dangerous pattern that we need to stop. And I will tell you that when you have an elected official blow into town and tell you that the way we get spending under control is we've got to cut 5%. Remember this if you remember nothing else. If you cut 10%, 5%, or 2% of something that the government shouldn't be doing in the first place, you're not going to get where you need to be. We need to, at the state level and at the federal level, shove spending inside a Constitution-sized box. Because if it fits inside a Constitution-sized box, it's not doing a bunch of stuff it shouldn't have been doing in the first place. And that is wasting your property. Okay? Now, what about the dependence on the federal government? $69 billion of the current biennial budget, or 35% of your state budget, is made up of federal funds. Does anybody believe that's a healthy posture for Texas, for 35% of your state budget to be made up of federal funds? I don't think so. Anybody here believe Washington, D.C. is going to get a handle on their out-of-control, vulgar spending anytime soon? No. So it is prudent for Texas to back away from the federal trough. Well, you would say, well, Joanne, You know, Texans send in quite a bit of tax dollars to the federal treasury. You would be correct. But since 2008, we have not been a donor state. That means the state of Texas and the citizens of Texas draw out more of the federal treasury than we pay in. Our hand is on that shovel. We need to tell our state officials to stop chasing the federal dollars, because we have one of these quirky, kind of on again, off again love affairs with with federal funds in the state of Texas. One minute they tell you they don't want the federal education funds, and the next minute the state's suing the federal government to get some of it. I don't know about you, but I can't keep up with that. I like consistency. If federal dollars have federal strings in education, we don't need them. Okay? Now, borrowing too much. We lead the nation in transportation debt, and I could stand here all night talking to you about how screwed up our transportation system is in the state of Texas. We need to get back to pay as you go. And you know what? That will require discipline in spending, and you know, doing what we do at home. We're very careful, and we don't go out on wild spending sprees if we know we can't afford it, or at least we do in the Fleming household. We do not deficit spend. Now, the last thing before Michael makes me land the plane. For the last 2 sessions, we've been telling the legislature that we needed to stop the magnets that attract illegal immigrants to our state. And it was too controversial. So today, we find out that we have not 52,000 children on our border, but we have over 300,000 illegals have been brought into the United States since April. And I just got off the phone with some of my folks that are in the know in law enforcement, and they say they have been told that another 300,000 is coming. I'm going to ask you this question. When is it going to be enough? When is it when we fill up every empty building, every Walmart, every vacant building in every community in Texas? Is that when it's going to be enough? We've passed the last easy exit. Next session, we must get a ban on sanctuary cities, and we must cut off the magnets that attract them.
We are still got the clipboards passing around over there, so please help the email list. I want to be thinking of some questions to put to these nice folks. It's always fun to play Stump the Panel. As you're thinking of your questions, though, and I'd appreciate it if you have a question directed at one of these guys, otherwise I have to pick on one or the other. A couple things I want to leave with, a couple kind of on a fine and a couple of points. First, it is possible, to Joanne's point, to say no to federal spending. Grandview, Texas. You've ever been to Grandview, Texas? It's a tiny little blip on the map. It's an exit you've probably blinked past south of Fort Worth in Tarrant County. Grandview, Texas, a few years ago, was told, hey, looks like your water tower is kind of old looking, so Chet Edwards, who's a member of Congress, is trying to buy his way into another term, which he'd done successfully for 20-some years. Chet Edwards said to them, I will give you money. So he marches off to Washington, D.C., gets $500,000 put into the federal budget for Grandview, Texas, to have a brand new water tower. Pretty good deal. He came back into town and said, look, I've got you $500,000 for your new water tower. And the people of Grandview said, oh, I'm interested. This is your money. I'm getting your money back. This is your money. And the people of Grandview looked at it, and they looked at the deal that he made for them. It required them to get the $500,000. They had to spend $125,000. The mayor of Grandview looked at the deal, looked at the map, like Tea Party folks, the mayor of Grandview could do now, and he realized that one, they didn't actually need a new water tower. Two, if they wanted to expand the water tower, it only cost them $100,000. And so he said to Chet Edwards, I don't think I want your money. And Chet Edwards said, but it's $500,000. I said, that's okay. You keep it. Chet Edwards threw a wild-eyed fit because Grandview, Texas figured it was too expensive to take the federal money. We need more of our cities, we need more of our states showing the same kind of moral courage that Grandview, Texas.
Yeah.
That's the way we should stop and hand off the second thing I suggest to you is we, as proud native Texan, every one of us take great pride that we are the economic engine of the nation. I can think back though, just when I was a kid, the economic engine of the nation was California. California was where you went if you wanted to launch a business, if you wanted to do something exciting in business or in culture, you went to California. That was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Today, California borders on being a third world country. Fortunes change quickly. And we look at all the job growth, all the entrepreneur growth, all the companies moving to Texas, we're doing everything right. I would suggest to you in a lot of ways in Texas, we've benefited by the stupidity of others. It's not so much that we're doing the right things, it's that California and Michigan and Illinois and New Jersey have been doing the wrong things. The least drunk person at the bar still shouldn't be driving home. That's a good little safety tip. California is sitting in the corner, passed out, drooling on itself, muttering about the businesses it used to have there. In Texas, we can walk a sort of straight line and identify our truck in the parking lot. We are not the model of sobriety that we think we are. And I would suggest to you that some of our sister states are sobering up. Sam Brownback in Kansas, a state that, quite frankly, I couldn't find on a map if you put a gun to my head. Sam Brownback in Kansas, though, has been working to cut their income tax. He wants to eliminate it. He's been working with the legislature to reduce business taxes and regulations. Nikki Haley in South Carolina, and then, my goodness, Bobby Jindal in Louisiana, a state that I actually think is a third world country, has been doing amazing things with the education policy and the tax policy. Oklahoma is beginning to give us a run for our money. They're not yet, but they're getting close. And I would suggest to you that we need sober-minded public policy. We need men and women who are going to approach public policy in the Texas legislature not with an attitude of, we're better off than California. I couldn't give a rip less of being better off than California. We need to be the best that we can be and pursue the kind of public policies that allow us to do so. The last thing I want to leave you with, and this becomes maybe the cautionary tale for each one of you. There are those in the Texas Capitol who really like the good old days. The good old days where when they went to Austin, the things that happened in Austin stayed in Austin. They liked that time. They really appreciated that time. They liked the time when they could go about their business without pesky questions from their constituents. And you and I and a lot of our friends watching Fox News and things, we have all gotten really, freaked out by the idea of the Internal Revenue Service, of being able to go through and tell churches and nonprofits and conservative groups and Tea Party groups to hand over the names of the donors and the contents of their prayers and all sorts of other things. Unfortunately, the state of Texas is doing the very same thing right now through the Texas Ethics Commission. The Texas Ethics Commission has stated that they want that power. They want the power to regulate nonprofit groups, to regulate the speech of Texas citizens. You have to be very cautious about that. The legislature last session, Joe Strauss over in the House and Kel Seliger, the senator from up in the Panhandle, worked together to pass legislation that would force every nonprofit group, including churches, to hand over the names of all their donors if that nonprofit group did something that some politician thought made them a little too uncomfortable and was worded about that purposely. Think of the damage it can cause. Think of the CEO of Mozilla who had to give up his job because it was discovered he made a $1,000 contribution to a pro-marriage group. A contribution that was supposed to be private, but the group's donor list got hacked. Think of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, based here in Austin, whose donor list was handed out by the Internal Revenue Service as an accident. I know those accidents only happen on the right. That list was then used by the chairman of the State Affairs Committee, Byron Cook, to call those donors and tell them, you know, your legislation might have a real problem if you keep getting the Texas Public Policy Foundation. That's the kind of power that some folks in Austin want to have in the state government. You and I need to fight against that. And I'd suggest the way that we fight against it is by showing up. My dad was a football coach when I was growing up and moved all around West Texas. Been to San Angelo many times, losing football games. That's okay. Dad always began his Thursday practice with the kids saying, no football team has ever won that failed to show up on Friday. Now, many lose who show up. Statistically, half lose who do show up. But everyone who fails to show up loses. I suggest to you that in public policy, the situation is the same thing. We lose when we don't show up. It's inconvenient. We just celebrated our Independence Day. Here's a fun trivia for you. The 4th of July, 1776, on the 5th of July, 1776, we were no more independent than we were on the 2nd of July of 1776. It wasn't for 4 years before we were actually independent. That's when we put our foot down. And we said, no more. Thank God that there were a lot of brave young men who said, yeah, I think I'm independent. They grabbed their muskets and they wouldn't die. Because they believed self-governance mattered. They believed that independence was a path they engaged in. I suggest you and I need to be showing up in the same way. You and I need to show up when it's inconvenient. We need to show up when it's possibly even dangerous. Yes. Because that's when we win. At this point, appreciate you being with us. And I would like to ask any questions for any of these nice folks, Charles Carter and I, and love to have any questions. Yes, sir.
Raise it down to the end.
Yes, sir.
Prince? We had a lady come up from San Antonio, who gave us a lecture on the transportation fund, which shocked the heck out of us when we were told it was $31 billion in the red, the largest of any of the states. What is really being done? Because we understand only 5 cents out of that 20-cent tax is being used for the roads, and then the other 15 cents goes into the pockets of the politicians. And the other thing that I brought up was the business about whether or not Texas was thinking about taxing mileage that would drive. She said yes, the legislatures had been talking about that.
Yes, and I know that lady. She's Terry Hall. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of legislators that like to make rude remarks about Terry, but I will tell you why, because she knows a heck of a lot more about transportation than they ever thought about, okay? I've gone through all of her documents and they are very accurate. Let me tell you this. Part of the reason that we're in the mess we're in with transportation is that we got into the habit of diverting funds that were earmarked and were intended. Your gasoline tax was supposed to go for highways. Well, there's 2 or 3 little different, so I'll just hit the high points. One of the things we've gotten away from is using transportation funds for building highways. We've got all these trendy light rail, streetcar, trolley car nonsense, okay? Then also, one of the things I believe that has harmed transportation and by driving up the cost is that we have this decentralized program called regional mobility authorities. And so that means that unelected people in your individual communities make decisions about transportation. And I'll just give you one example of waste. When they wanted to add a toll lane to Mopac, the bids came in $20 million under the estimates. So what did the Austin RMA do? They said, well, thank you very much. We'll just keep the 20 million and we'll use it for enhancements. And I will tell you, sir, that enhancements usually have nothing to do with moving traffic. Okay? So we spend money on things that are non-highway use that don't control the issue of congestion in high traffic areas. We also have gotten the habit of using transportation as an economic development tool. In other words, we build highways to nowhere because if we build it, then they will come. That's part of the big business being in bed with big government, okay? So the diversions, the wasting of money, and then spending money on things that don't actually move traffic and address the transportation. I will tell you that the red flag was whenever we started borrowing money for maintenance, and we did that, I believe, during the 82nd session. So I will tell you that if we go back to pay-as-you-go, there is a way to do it. Terry Hall and I put together a plan, and I was told by my senator, Fleming, if you guys want a transportation plan, you have to put it together and you have to sell it. To which I replied, well, why do we need you?
An extra note on the transportation question. In November of this year, on your November ballot is going to be a question, a state constitutional amendment. That amendment would divert dollars that are currently intended, redivert dollars currently intended for the Economic Stabilization Fund, which some people erroneously call the rainy day fund. It's not a rainy day fund. Rainy day funds are where you go see the movies when it's raining instead of playing outside. The Economic Stabilization Fund is there to keep the state of Texas afloat when emergencies occur. Two different functions. Anyway, divert some of that money into Fund 6. Fund 6 is the Road and Bridge Construction and Maintenance Fund. And we are told that we have to do that or else the state will not be able to spend any money on the roads and bridges. We're told it's a crisis. Everything's a crisis, of course. Now, let me suggest to you that you and I should ask a couple more questions of our elected officials. Because last month at the Texas Department of Transportation meeting, the commissioners, the appointed commissioners, the Texas Department of Transportation, voted to spend $350 million out of the Road and Bridge Fund. Now, did they take that money and build roads or maintain roads? No. They gave $50 million to the city of Austin to buy choo-choo trains for their commuter rail project. They gave $97 million to El Paso so that they could go and buy some choo-choo trains. They gave $200 million to Dallas to supplement their purchase of choo-choo trains for light rail. $350 million taken out of the Road and Bridge Construction and Maintenance Fund to be spent by these mass transit agencies in Austin, El Paso, and Dallas, rather than on roads and bridges. So when your state rep and when your state senator say you have to vote for this constitutional amendment because we're running out of money, perhaps you and I should say, well, then stop spending it so frivolously. You and I should bring that up to them and ask them, hey, why is TxDOT trying to spend down all the money on things that don't actually move people? So, a little extra hint. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. This document is coming from the North Texas Tarrant County group that's been so successful in replacing all the representatives that will be in our 2015 legislation. It's regarding the immigration issues that we have at hand, and to start calling the situation what it is, which is the exploitation of children and human trafficking. So as people are saying, oh, we're cold-hearted that you don't want to track these children, it is going to be the mass institutionalization of hundreds of thousands of children. That is not compassionate, and that is not humane. So, as Ms. Fleming was saying, that we've got to cut off the magnetism of implying that we are equipped to educate the children, to handle the magnitude of health issues that are coming over. They're going to be getting a pamphlet talking about all the various different types of disease. It's tragic what is happening. However, to imply that you can influx hundreds of thousands of children
into an already taxed and levied situation of our education system. What they were proposing is having resolutions at the city levels and at the county levels, basically closing these communities of being able to accommodate the influx of the children to where you do not make it available to attract people under these false pretenses and false hopes. So I believe some of the terminology is exploitation of children and human trafficking. So if people are interested about doing resolutions at a city level and at your county level, I will give information to Ms. Fleming.
Lots of people do.
Or whoever, I don't know. We'll find out who the Tea Party group here represented is. I'm from Brady, so we're just happy to be here. But so anyway, I just thought that was a really good idea of something action that we can do at the local level to try to accommodate this desperate situation we're in.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question about Common Core. You know, they're saying that Common Core is illegal in the state of Texas, but we have it in our school systems. There's a program called Jump to Common Core that all of our school systems are enrolled to in the state of Texas. And the question I have is, you know, we talk about Common Core and how bad it is for all of our students, but it is especially bad for our special needs students. It's teaching in one way, and you can't teach special needs children that way. Why isn't this being brought up, you know, when we talk about the harms of Common Core? Because our special needs kids are the ones that are going to be left totally behind.
Marilyn?
I'm not sure I quite understand the first part of your question. Are you saying, why are we doing Common Core because it's supposedly illegal in the state?
It's supposed to be illegal, but we're using it.
Well, I know that we are not allowed to do C-scope in the state.
It's being used also.
And C-scope, they just changed the name to the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, or TEX Resources. And so they are still doing the C-scope. I know many people who will be addressing Common Core and C-scope, revisiting it come the next legislative session. The National PTA had their annual conference in Austin 2 weeks ago, and some friends put together a Common Core Solutions conference that was held right across the street from the National PTA's convention. And that was put together very quickly, and the national press paid attention to those of us who were there. And so awareness is growing more and more against Common Core in C-scope, and many people will be addressing this next session.
John Seago, Tex Rec, if you maybe fill folks in on the action taken by defeated Senator Bob Dole. They're kind of this theme of trying to shut conservatives up. He actually got you guys pulled off of the air for talking about his record.
Right. So the piece of legislation that I talked about that Takes Right to Life led the opposition to, that would have given doctors and hospitals more power over medical decisions that you make for yourself or for your loved ones, was actually authored by Senator Bob Dole, representative, had a district north of Dallas. And so he was the author of that piece of legislation. We opposed the legislation. We ended up defeating that piece of legislation. And whenever he was actually up for re-election, so we were making voters aware that he was actually working against us, even though he was pro-life when it came to abortion, and he had in the past taken actions to protect pregnant women against a predatory abortion industry. He was actually hurting the cause when it came to protecting innocent human life in hospital settings. And so we were making the voters aware of this, and one of the ways that we did that is by a radio ad. And so we put together a radio ad explaining what the bill did, and that he authored it. Well, Senator Dole actually wrote a letter to the 2 radio stations that were airing our ad, and pretty much threatening them with lawsuits and told them to take our ad off of the air. So we had a contract with the radio station to air, we paid for it, everything was taken care of, and the state senator comes in, doesn't like the message of our ad, and so starts putting pressure, political pressure on these radio stations. And the 2 radio stations actually took the ads down for a little bit longer than a day. They stopped airing our radio ads, and so while we were dealing with the legality of everything, we ended up editing the ad and put it back up. But that's kind of the intimidation, kind of the bullying that Michael was talking about earlier. Is that as conservatives, whenever we start getting involved in issues and start telling voters of what's actually going on in Austin, your elected officials are actually finding new ways and new tools to keep you from knowing what's really going on. And in that specific situation, we did get the ad back up, still telling the truth. We did change a little bit just so while the lawyers worked in the back rooms. And that senator was defeated by 300 votes. It was a state Senate race, and we won by 300 votes. So, now, I don't think that's going to stop the medical lobby. They still have a few senators that they can go to carry their water. However, you can be assured that these next senators that are in line are going to think twice before they carry the medical lobby's water on attacking sanctity of life in these situations.
Now, one thing I would note that Texas' Right to Life is doing, which is so important, a lesson that each one of us should learn from, is they didn't just take the electoral win and walk away. They're actually putting, taking the dead carcass of the defeated state senator. They're mounting the head on the wall because they now filed a lawsuit against Bob Gould for torturous interference in the contract, meaning Bob Gould's out of his personal funds now having to defend his actions attacking them. That's sending a real strong message to every other politician. You start screwing around with conservatives, we do fight back, and we fight for you.
I have a question for Mary Lynn, Grocery Slager. You talked about the Turkish charter schools, I think run by the Harmony Group. I understand the leader of that group is a very strong Muslim. Could you talk about any Muslim influence in these charter schools?
Well, I have testified and lobbied a great deal on this issue about the Harmony schools. They produce outstanding math and science students, and I will not question that. I will not take that credit away from that. I have never stated that they teach Islam in their schools. However, I have been accused of saying that. And of course, when one testifies at the State Board of Education or before a legislative committee, that is all videotaped and audio taped, and it is there archived as a part of the public record. So anyone can go through those and hear what I said. I've spoken all over the state on this issue, but I am careful to say, give them credit for their outstanding math and science students. They promote Turkish culture in these schools, and that's a huge concern of ours. They teach Turkish cooking after class. They offer Turkish language courses. They teach song and dance. I have been to Turkey. I was there in 1996 for observing a UN conference. I traveled outside of Istanbul. I thought it was a beautiful country. The food was wonderful. The culture was interesting. However, the secular government was overtaken by Islamists several years ago, and Erdogan is head of their government now, and people would like to return Turkey to an Islamist caliphate. These Turkish charter schools do not just exist in Texas. There are over 150 Turkish-run charter schools or campuses throughout America. In Texas, if you get a charter, you can open as many campuses as you like. That's why the Harmony charter schools in Texas have 40 campuses. We don't call them schools. So Mike, and these schools go beyond America. They go all over the world. I met a girl who graduated from one in Romania last year when I was outside of America. These schools are very controversial. A man by the name of Fethullah Gulen, G-U-L-E-N, is the person who inspires these Turkish charter schools. It is said that he does not run them. People who operate these schools will say, oh, we're inspired by him. He fled Turkey in the late 1990s because he wanted to turn Turkey into an Islamist caliphate. He came to the U.S. seeking asylum, and he was granted eventually permanent residence. He lives in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania, in a carefully guarded compound. And he, at one time, I believe in 2009, was something like the 12th or 13th most influential Muslim out of 500 other high-profile Muslims in the world. My concern is if children in these schools are learning Turkish culture, where will their allegiance lie? Will it be pledging allegiance to the United States of America, or will their allegiance be to Turkey? That is my concern.
Not really a question, but a statement. Last couple of years, Governor Perry's done a good job of going to California, New York, and several other states, gathering businesses who moved their people to Texas. These people, not all of them are conservative. You know, people like you need to get it out and tell the conservatives about voting, because if we don't, they're going to overwhelm us pretty quick.
That's why Tim Lambert proposes a wall to the east, west, and north.
I don't know who exactly to ask this to. I'd actually like to hear y'all. I haven't heard any concern about the attempt to stifle speaking about God and prayer in public meetings, and as our founding fathers did so openly from what I've studied, and has been such a strength to this country, and as the Bible says, it's righteousness that exalts a nation. But that comes from knowing the Bible, our moral base, and to operate from that. So, do any of you have anything to say about that?
Well, it is legal to teach a Bible curriculum in Texas public schools. A law was passed a few years ago. We didn't get the law conservatives really wanted, but where the Bible would be used as the textbook. That is not the law that was passed. A law was passed that they could teach about the Bible. So it is a step in the right direction.
There's a reason that homeschooling, that Texas leads the nation in the number of homeschool families. And it's because across this state, people who can't afford a private school and are unhappy with what is going on in public schools have an opportunity to teach their children, or as some of us used to say, raise up their children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And I do think we heard earlier this evening about what's going on in San Antonio and some of these other states, other cities. Texas is not exempt. We are, make no mistake about it, we are in a cultural war. And our president and his administration are doing everything they can to help defeat us in that cultural war. But I think that's the reason that we see meetings like this, and we see people all over the state standing up, because and what we've heard tonight is it's not just the physical issues. It's the social issues, it's the moral issues, it's the spiritual issues that unite us.
And Mr. Linder, while you have the microphone, if you want to give folks a real, the short thumbnail as you can, I know we're pressing up on folks on here. But the abuses that we've been seeing coming out of CPS targeted at religious families, targeted homeschool families.
We are involved in a case right now defending a family in Dallas. And these people are amazing people. This family has a ministry to homeless people. They have adopted several minority children. If you talk to anybody who's in the adoption business, they will tell you that the children they're adopting are difficult to place. And CPS in November or September of last year got a complaint because they had this family was keeping other kids temporarily who were in bad situations, and one of these little children wandered away, and Dad went out, and eventually the police found him before Dad did, brought him back. CPS came to do a visit, and to make a long story short, CPS removed 7 children from that home in November of last year. And a 14-day hearing in December, that hearing lasted 12 hours. This family was attacked for their religious beliefs. They're Christians, after all. They were attacked for their focus on social work in terms of ministering as Christians to these people in need. And finally, they were attacked for their homeschooling. And those children, some have not yet been returned. And I just last week, I think it was last week, there was a hearing on the DFPS hearing, CPS, before the Sunset Committee. And Breitbart, Texas has an article today, or this week, about this hearing, and a family who testified, the same kind of low-income family, whose children were taken away from them. They were accused of killing their children. And the woman testified they had to sell their home and their property to spend $120,000 to get their kids back. Their children were molested in foster care. And so CPS workers today are, they're uncontrolled. And we are taking a page out of Texas Right to Life's book, and we are trying to defend this family, but our plan is to file a civil suit against this caseworker. And we believe in this case in Dallas that the judge is at fault. This was an associate judge, not an elected judge, and she, the caseworker, asked in an ex parte hearing to force the parents to get a psychological evaluation, and the judge said, no, I want you to remove the children. The caseworker later changed her paperwork to justify that judge's action. We've been in this court since January, and the judge won't give us a transcript of the January hearing. And so our goal is to help this family. But Michael is exactly right. What we have to do as citizens is we have to hold these people accountable to the fullest extent of the law.
An astounding figure. Only 50% of Christians are registered to vote. And of that 50%, only 20% vote. So, pardon me, where are the Christians? We can make a difference. We can make a difference if we will get to the polls, if we will understand who is a true candidate, what they truly believe, and if we get there and vote. Now, let me just tell you that the other side is not taking this November election laying down. I was told last Saturday morning that one of them was at Starbucks in Waxahachie, sitting there, registering people to vote as they came in the door. When my friend was outside there, she looked, and there were several cars there with Wendy Davis stickers on them. That's who's registering them to vote. In your churches, in your clubs, in your tea parties, wherever you are, you need to have those cards with you. You can get them from your county elections office. They're easy to get. They're not costly. Get them. Whenever you find someone that believes as you do, be sure. Now, let me just tell you something else. If they've moved, if they've changed their address, they have to be registered again. So you can do a mighty work for all of us in standing up for what God has given us, this wonderful country. But we're going to lose it if we don't, as Christians, stand up and take control of what we can do. So I encourage you to do that.
Thank you so much. Being mindful of, time for one more? Okay, thank you. One more, okay. You get the last question.
I always get the last word.
Excellent.
Excellent. Have any of you heard about the state income tax being considered by Peary, Dewhurst, and Strauss to pay for this illegal immigration? No?
No. I mean, one, there's no vehicle for a imposition of income tax in Texas until January, when the legislature next meets. I think Charles Perry would probably walk on hot coals and roll through glass before, and make other people do it likewise. There are a number of Democrats. Lon Burnham from Tarrant County has every year faithfully filed legislation to impose an income tax on the people of Texas. The Democrats kicked him out of office this year in his primary, so even the Democrats don't want an income tax in Texas. So I think we're probably saying that. On the other hand, I think you raise a good point that I think we need to be very cautious about some of our elected officials who might end up trying to use, don't let a good crisis go to waste, as we've heard repeatedly, and use the humanitarian crisis on the border as an excuse to raid our wallets for whatever pet projects they have. I would suggest that's why you and I be ever vigilant. I want to thank so much San Angelo TEA Party for letting us be here this evening. We'll all stick around for a while, have to answer questions and chit-chat more, but thank you so much for being with us tonight.
That was great, wasn't it? Thank y'all for being here. Thank you so much. And I hope Nathan can get you a little more fired up. Anyway, well, that's right. Hey, I was remiss in some of my introductions. I do want to recognize a few people. Our Senate District 28 SREC man, John Beckmeyer, is down from Colorado City. Teresa's with him. I missed Representative Perry because he wasn't thinking he wasn't my representative, but he is running for our Senate District 28. And it is the 22nd. Charles, he's going to be here at our next meeting, and we're going to give him the floor for 20-30 minutes. We have a scheduled speaker, but we think this is important, Charles, so thank you for coming. Sorry, Kat. Hemphill family drove up from Brady. Good to see y'all. I know we have Dale and James here from Abilene. Faye and Jeff are here from Odessa. Faye's here trying to see a doctor in Goodfellow.
Notice me behind
And yes, Dad, you did know her when they called. You said, I know this name, Faye Hall. And I said, it's the lady when we were campaigning in Odessa and it was so hot that we went by her home and she gave us lemonade. But anyway, thank everybody for being here. Please be sure to visit with Charles, visit with everybody, and thank y'all again for coming, Mark.